He is a teacher, leader, thinker, lawyer, social entrepreneur, as well as human rights and climate justice activist. An educator for more than 40 years, he has participated in nearly 24 UN climate change summits, including the most recent COP28 in Dubai last December. With us now on Thought Leaders, please welcome former Dean of the Ateneo School of Government, Antonio Tony Viña. So good to have you here, and a very happy new year, Dean Tony.
Happy New Year, Kathy.
And such great news that you've started the year with. You've written in your December 23rd column, best Christmas gift.
Yes.
You've had a clean bill of health from your doctors.
That is important. Probably the most important. That means I can do more work and be more productive and fruitful in 2024.
And in fact, you mentioned it as missions with an S.
Exactly.
So what sort of missions are you hoping to accomplish in 2024?
Human rights missions are very important because all over the world, including the Philippines, we still have quite a lot of human rights violations, and I'd like to be able to defend, especially environmental defenders, human rights defenders. There is the climate justice mission. The climate crisis is accelerating, and so we have to accelerate our response as well, and that's at various levels. Obviously, I'm more in the legal, political level of response, and there's a teaching mission that's very important for me. I mentor quite a lot of young people, including very young people. I mentor, my youngest is a 17-year-old young person, and actually 21, 22-year-old, so very young people that are just finishing senior high school. I'm mentoring that level. And of course, there are others that are lawyers and others, but that's really an important mission to do that.
I can imagine it would be a very interesting memoir that you're writing and you're hoping to complete this year in time for your birthday in October.
Yes.
So how's that coming along?
That's going slower than I thought, because I thought I could write a lot in Christmas.
And you can? You didn't.
Christmas, so many parts. No, I did write a few
parties.
chapters in Christmas, but I would say half of what I wanted to, because you also have to engage with your relative. We have many relatives staying with us during Christmas, and I did bring the family out to Tagaytay. I had a very important wedding to go to as a ninong of people I mentored. So, but it's gonna happen. It's 65 years of life, right? I mean, I write about it as a grace. Even the things that you fear, the things that make you suffer and sad, is actually a grace, a gift from God.
It is, and that's exactly what you mentioned in your social media posts, describing your memoirs in your social media as highly political, but also very personal.
It is very personal.
So in what way?
I describe what happened in our history because I've lived this 60 years of very credible Philippine history of ups and downs, right? And I'm there, but I reflect on the choices, not only that I made, but a generation of Filipinos had to make during martial law, during, of course, after the EDSA revolution, the time of Fidel Ramos. I was a government official then. As different problems crop up, like climate change was a new problem in the 1990s, and I responded to that. But it's not about me. I always say my memoir is not about me, but it's for a generation that had to face choices. And reason why I'm writing it is that the next generation do not have to reinvent things. They can learn from those of us who went before them.
Specific to that, climate justice activism, because it's a pretty new phrase, like you said, it was in the 90s, but it's your life work.
Yes.
And when you come to think of COP21, that's when you started to lead the negotiations.
Yes,
which
that was Paris
resulted
negotiation.
in the landmark agreement in Paris.
Yes. I started even before that, in the 1990s. I started as an academic. I started by doing a dissertation on climate change in Yale University. And then I became a government official and was assigned to negotiate all these agreements for the Philippines. And Paris in 2021, in 2015, that's COP21, was the day when we had this agreement that we thought could solve the problem. It hasn't, but we were building on that. And that's really climate activism by its nature is intergenerational. And that's why I said it's so important for me as a mission to mentor the next generations because this problem will not go away even when I'm 18, 90, when I'm retired or when I leave this world, it will still be there. But what you want is the next generation does things better than you. And so for climate, that's what we need to do. Because we're not doing, we're doing a lot, but it's never enough. So we have to push to do better. And the young people need to push us to do better, and the young people need to do things better than us.
But the young people also need to know how you did it and pulled the weight of the Philippines into the discussions that created the draft agreement, which became the landmark Paris Agreement, along with 6 other negotiators, if I'm not mistaken, back in 2015.
Yeah, but
what did you do to convince the other negotiators in the table?
What we do is we sit down with them, with the other negotiators, and we exchange views. And then we try to find, I call it, it's not a compromise, but it's the highest form of agreement possible. So it's not going to be the ideal solution, the one solution, because you cannot agree to that. But it's the highest form of agreement. And frequently, that is enough to start the ball rolling. Because for climate change, the important thing is we keep the ball rolling. We keep the process running so that we're able to get ahead of the curve. That's our problem with climate change. It's always ahead of us instead of us jumping over and being there in front. So I'm confident because I work with all of these young people, as I said, from 17 years old to 30 years old. That's the range.
That was in 2015. You brought in a lot of
always,
young people.
I've always done that. Even now, that I do that. The range of people I work with is, I would say, from 15 years old to, in terms of mentoring. And then people graduate from that, and they actually become professionals themselves and doing things on their own. So now you have dozens and dozens of people that are working on this, many of whom I have trained, especially in the Philippines. And that's why the Philippines, very important, whenever the government allows it, becomes an important player. So the time of Fidel Ramos, the time even of GMA, the time of Aquino, and now the time of Marcos, that's happening. Unfortunately, in the time of President Duterte, he didn't care so much about international issues. And that's not a secret that he was very cynical about international agreements, about foreign policy. So we kind of got stalled during the time. But the Marcos government is engaged internationally. So now our mall open for input, for help from the youth. Now for the first time since 2015 in Paris, we had a youth delegate there. Socorro Rodrigo's now professional in her own right in the field. She was the last youth delegate that we had. And now we have Javea Estabilio, who's 17 years old, but started training under me when she was 15, who became the first youth delegate of the Philippines in 10 years. So we need to do that because we need to have the youth really engage in this because I don't want to just dump it to them and untrained and not able to deal with the problem. They say, why did you do this to us, right? I mean, we don't want our children to tell us, their parents, why did you do this to us? Instead, we want them to say, well, you did tell us and you did tell us what you did and we know it's not enough and now we want to do better.
And as you say, it is, in other words, a whole-of-nation approach. You need the government support, civil society organizations, the youth, very much a part of the whole mix.
Yes.
What do you think was the breakthrough that brought the Philippines to the fore when it was COP21?
For that, it was the fact that the president himself, President Aquino, paid attention to the negotiations and did bold moves to commit the Philippines to reduce its emissions and to take the boldest positions possible. There's a backstory to that, of course. When he started as president, he wasn't that engaged. But Yolanda happened in 2014, 2013, November 2013. So that, in a way, converted him and said, okay, this is a priority. So when we went to Paris, we were very much empowered. You know, every day in Paris, almost every day, I'm probably exaggerating when I say every day, but out of the 12 days of negotiation, at least 8 of those days, the Philippines got an award from NGOs. It was called the Ray of the Day Award. The best delegation today was the Philippines for doing this in the negotiations. They have a counterpart award called the Fossil of the Day. This is the worst delegation.
Fossil fuel.
The worst delegation for fossil fuel. And it's the worst delegation. Philippines never received that, but we received at least 8 times, if I remember correctly, the Ray of the Day Award because we were very aggressive, ambitious, but smart. I negotiated, for example, with Saudi Arabia on what's called the 1.5 goal, which is language that will have the most, ambitious climate action possible. And Saudi Arabia for years have denied that, have said no to that. But when I talked to them, they agreed. And as long as I found a formula that they could actually accept, and we offered that formula, and Saudi Arabia agreed. So here in negotiations, as I said, you try to achieve the highest agreement possible. And we achieved that in Paris. Dubai, we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. Maybe we also did the same thing, or maybe that was the only agreement possible for this time.
But did
so
we? I mean, there's
forward.
a big question on the language because instead of using the phase out of fossil fuels, it was more of transition away or a phase down.
If you do know your language.
Did we not fight?
We fought.
Because a lot of the climate activists here say we should have. We should have forced
fought,
the language.
In fairness to the government, we fought, and many of the developing countries fought. But it's probably too much to expect that the oil-producing countries, for the first time, they have agreed to mention fossil fuels in a climate agreement. Might have been too much to force them. But honestly, in my view, as a lawyer, I'm talking as a lawyer, not as a political activist. You look at the term, phase out, transition away, phase down, right? Phase down is what do you call this? It's a step towards phase out. Transition away, the end of that is a phase out. So, from a legal point of view, they really are not any different. There's a political difference, but legally they're not any different. But I can work with that language. Now I will have to say, are we transitioning away? 5 years from now, are we transitioning? Philippines, we can actually say, are we transitioning away? Are we closing down our coal power plants? Are we limiting our natural gas plants, to really just a transition fuel and not a permanent fuel? So that we can actually demand accountability, even in the language of transition away from. I prefer phase out, of course, because that's clearer. But transition away ends with a phase out. That's my interpretation of transition away.
When you talk to the Philippine Movement for Climate Justice, they say there's been a lack of clarity. For when the Philippine delegation came to Dubai and did not have a clear position on fossil fuels, do you agree?
I will nuance that because I saw them also grapple with this even here in the Philippines. And the challenge in the Philippines is how to transition. In fact, that's a real problem. How to transition uh, away. Um, did the Philippines go to Dubai with the most ambitious mitigation position? No. Um, because very explicit to them that their priority is adaptation and loss and damage. Um, in my view, from an integrated point of view, you want to be maximum in all three and take a progressive outcome. And they were probably not as ready. But I do remember, personally, whenever we would suggest things to the government, they did accommodate it. Compared to the last 6 years, compared to the Duterte years when they will not even listen to us. They will not even make us sit down with us. This time, the government people, the most important negotiator in the Philippines was this lawyer. I also was his initial first mentor, Vice. And he sat down with people, with other government officials to get that feedback, that input from everyone. Could they have done better? Of course, they could have done better. But they could have done much more worse. I think the Duterte government did a lot worse, to be honest. And the Marcos government on climate change has done better.
If we dig a little deeper on the document, it also does not mention the stopping of the approval of investments in fossil fuel infrastructure, which is really crucial for a phase out or at least a phase down. Yes. But it also cited the tripling of the renewable energy capacity, yes, and the phase down of unabated coal power.
Yes.
So what do you make of this double guidance in the documentation?
It's typical, what we call typical climate talk, right? And in a way, typical environmental talk, which is you advance here, but you still acknowledge your legacy of bad decisions.
So is it good for the lawyer or the political activist, or none of either?
What we need to do, it gives the political activists an opportunity to expand the work, get the renewable energy. That everyone agrees that's a good thing. So there's no question about that. The investments part, it doesn't matter whether it's mentioned there or not. The very fact that there is a decision to transition away from fossil fuels mean there will be less investments, or there should be less investments, and we can call them out. And very important here is the role of banks. We have to call out the banks. So in the Philippines, we're actually doing that. I mean, we have a coalition in the Philippines that's calling for a fossil fuel phase out, that calls out the banks. For many years, we focus on coal. I personally think that battle is won. It's just a question of timing. How long will we keep some coal power plants? The thing is, everyone also knows I cannot close down a coal power plant or any power plant tomorrow, because that would be disastrous for the economy, for consumers, for everyone, right? But for example, you can close down all coal power plants in 5 years. That's doable, right? And you can actually say that you'll only do natural gas up to a certain point. 10 years, 15 years, I can't give the exact dates when you finally close down. As I said, you finally close down all fossil fuels. Because it's very important, you have to have enough renewable energy to replace not just the fossil fuel power that you have, but the energy that you need in the future. So it's not just replacing what's now, but making sure that what's replacing what now is also good enough for the future when you have 150 million people. People forget that. We have now 112, 140, 115 million people. In 10 years' time, we'll have 130, 140 million people. In 2050, we'll have 150 million people. You have to feed them, house them, get them to go to school, right? So we need sustainable development. And we need energy for sustainable development. And that energy has to be renewable. But to get there is a decision that the country must make.
So to get to 1.5 as the target for the temperature target that we agreed on in 2015, is it still achievable? Because you said it's not happening.
It is
Looking
still
back
achievable.
after 9 years
It is still achievable
for the Philippines.
That's a global target, so it's not just the Philippines. For the Philippines, what we need to contribute to that, of course, it is achievable. Because what we need to do that is just do what we promise what to do, which is to cut our emissions by 75% by 2030.
But even that is a big question because, as you mentioned earlier, there should be a transition
There should be a clear
from
plan.
the fossil fuel dependent to renewable energy reliance.
Yes, there has to be a clear decision by the government. As I said, you cannot close down all your power plants tomorrow, but you can close it down in 5 years' time. You cannot not have natural gas for, in the next 10 years maybe, but at certain point you can actually say, this one. But the condition is you have to triple, quadruple your renewable energy. And there's lots of work already that says that this can be done and it can be accelerated. But it needs to be led by government decisions. We have very good climate officials. I always say this openly to everyone, that we have the best group of climate officials that we've ever had in this country, including during the time when I was the #1 climate official in the 90s. But this group that we have, Secretary Julio Lechaga, Secretary Papa Lotilla, Secretary Solidum of DOST, Vice Chair Borge of Climate Change Commission, they're excellent. They're really the best that we can ever have for this. That's why I say, if they can't hack it, we can't hack it. But they need, to be honest, they also need to be bolder in their decisions. Because saying the right words, but going only halfway will not solve it.
So what is bolder then? Because when we listen to critics like, let's say, John Leo Algo of Living Laudato Si Philippines, he says achieving the self-imposed target is going to be difficult because given the current policy directions, another fossil fuel, and you mentioned it, natural gas, is being used as a stopgap. So what do we need to do? What kind of policies
and
do
that
we need to
stopgap
change?
is necessary. You have to have a transition. Actually, this is where I will introduce the idea of a just transition. We have to have a transition, but the transition must be just. It should not compromise our sustainable development options. It should not make us lose electricity and power and energy. But a just transition is a transition. People forget that. Meaning to say it ends at a time. And so for me, natural gas, what I need is a policy that actually tells me this is where it ends. Yes, stopgap, but please tell me when the stopgap is no longer needed because you've done your job in accelerating the energy transition. But the literature is there and the experience is there. You can accelerate your energy transition faster without compromising sustainable development.
So bolder would mean the government officials involved in climate setting these timelines because it can be done.
Yes.
But if and when you talk to the jeepney operators and drivers, they'd complain. The modernization of the jeepneys have really been a sticky issue, not only for this administration, but for 2 administrations because of cost.
Yes.
The cost of making their
yes.
machines environment friendly is something that hits them in the gut because it might mean a loss of jobs, a loss of opportunities. So how would you address that?
So that's a good example, because I'm with the jeepney drivers and and operators
You're
here
in favor of
in
them
favor of their
striking
position
against
on
the modernization program.
on not implementing this particular version of modernization. I am not against modernization. Okay, let's be clear about that. But this particular version, it is incredible to me that after 3 or 4 attempts, and there's always a strike, and there's a dialogue and discussion, the next time around, they come back with the same plan, the same cost. It's, you know, where are these people coming from? Who are they listening to, right? So jeepneys, for example, I mean, I don't mean to be anti-Chinese or the Chinese produce good products, but obviously the Chinese jeepneys are very expensive, or foreign jeepneys are very expensive. So you have to resort to something more local, right? E-jeepneys that are local. It's incredible to me, honestly. It's incredible to me that this has happened so many times, and every time, so the government says, okay, we heard you, we will come back. It's the same plan. It hasn't changed, right? That's not just transition.
So how can we get out of that vicious cycle? What is
Well,
just
the government
transition
needs
for
to
the
come back
modernization
with,
program?
well, for example, it needs to come back with much lower cost or greater subsidy, right? It cannot be done without greater subsidy or lesser cost. Either way, that really has to be the case. I mean, I think there's a value here of actually consolidating and the drivers getting income that's regular, that is expected. They get benefits, health, social security, etc., in exchange of their freedom. That's the trade-off, right? But if it's a good package, they will take the trade-off. But it's not a good package. It's a bad package for both the drivers and the operators. It's only a good package in a home for the corporations. The big corporations, I mean, that are farming and gonna do this. So but what's gonna happen if they really insist on this is that all of these people, tens of thousands, will lose their jobs, and you will end up with 4 or 5 corporations that have enough money, etc. That's the transition. That's not a jeepney modernization program, right? And I just don't think that's a just transition at all.
I'm going to go back to your mention of banks, because financing is really a huge problem. When you talk about the climate crisis, how are we going to ensure, but for countries like the Philippines that are highly climate vulnerable, that the money that will go around will support countries like ours, first and foremost, because we're most vulnerable?
Well, we have to be assertive, first of all, at the global level. There is now a loss and damage fund that's being set up. The Philippines was a major player in the last 10 years, 15 years, 30 years even, to fight for this. And so that's good.
And fight for a seat and got it. Acquired a seat in the inaugural board.
We have a seat in the board, and now we want it to be hosted by us. So that's a good thing. I don't agree with those who say, well, we're not very good in environment, therefore we shouldn't host. I'm sorry, no country in the world then will be able to host, but not a single country in the world. Well, maybe I can say 2 or 3 countries, and but I would hesitate to say, because someone will for sure say, no, that's not true. The country that you say is good. I mean, there are some countries are better than others, right? The Philippines is probably right in the middle. We're not the worst, but we're not the best.
So how can we get and take advantage of this arrangement then, that we have a seat in the loss and damage
because
board?
You will have a say. And because if not only that you have a seat, but if you host it particularly, you can benefit from the knowledge, you can benefit from knowing the process, the procedures. You can benefit in piloting activities in the Manila Observatory where we're doing that. I mean, we're trying to develop on how projects and initiatives where we can recover or claim loss and damage for livelihoods, for economic assets, for biodiversity, for cultural institutions that are lost, even for knowledge, indigenous knowledge that's lost. You can be compensated for that, and of course for deaths that's caused by climate change. Um, so, us being in the board and our being in, hopefully, if we get the host, would be a big thing for us. So I support the Marcos government in their attempts to also be the host of the board. I think that's what it's called, the host of the board. So the secretariat of the board will be here in the Philippines. That would be fantastic. Of course, they have to get the hosting, right? So that's actually done through the good work of the Department of Foreign Affairs, and we have some of the best diplomats in the world. Vice Chair Borja is herself of the Climate Change Commission, is himself a former diplomat. Secretary Lisaga is an international relations graduate from Georgetown University. Secretary Popo Lutilla is an international lawyer. I mean, DOST Secretary Rene Solidum is like one of the most brilliant scientists in the field, very well known internationally. So they know their stuff, and so I have confidence that they'll be able to do this. But you know, Kathy, the real preparation for any climate engagement internationally is what you do at home.
And what is that?
You have to be serious about climate action. You have to be more ambitious. As much as I praise these colleagues that are now running these agencies, I will also say they are not as ambitious as I think they should.
What's keeping them, you think?
It's inertia, it's vested interest, not their own vested interest, but the business interest. You know, I mean, I always say this, and what's so unfortunate about the energy industry in the Philippines is those that benefit from old technology, coal, even natural gas, that they control the industry. They're also the biggest investors, or some of the biggest investors in renewable energy. So it's schizophrenia, right?
Should be good or bad?
No, it's bad because you're benefiting from the old while controlling also the new, right? When what we should do is unshackle them from the old. The government, it has to be the government that unshackles them. In all my conversations with industry, they always say this: of course, we're willing to go to renewable energy, but the government must tell us. And the government must cut off all the subsidies for fossil fuels, must cut off, you know. I mean, it will even go to cars. Now, we're so far behind our neighbors and many countries on electronic vehicles. It's so difficult to buy electric vehicles in the Philippines, even with all the alternatives, because the car industry who still wants to dump us their old combustion engines. Right? There's all sorts of what they call this urban legends that electric vehicles will not go very far. It will lock you out. That's like 1% of the problem in all. You know, EV is the future. EV is what we want now, but the old, right? And I have very personal experience about that with my dealers. You know, when I buy a car, it's like, why are you forcing me to buy an old technology when I want the new technology, and you keep on delaying that new technology because they're dumping the old technology in us. The same with coal, they're dumping. Even nuclear. I mean, there's modern nuclear, there's also very old nuclear, right? And I'm gonna not mention countries, etc. But you know, some countries are dumping their old nuclear on us, right? I mean, I'm not gonna foreclose any possibility of any resort to nuclear 20, 30 years from now when we solve the problem of waste, if that gets solved. But until that gets solved, we should stay away from nuclear.
So where does that take our 75% target of cutting back on the greenhouse gas emissions then, if you're saying they're lacking a little bit more bold ambition to actually get the climate crisis off our back?
That means we will not be able to contribute what we're supposed to contribute to that 1.5 target. And you know, the thing is then you're not, when you're not doing what you promised to do, you don't have the moral authority to tell other countries that you're doing this to us. Even it's true that they're doing this to us. We don't contribute as much as China. By the way, there's another fallacy here, that the Philippines doesn't contribute so much, so therefore we don't have to do anything, or we don't have to be serious about our commitment. That's not true. Out of 200 countries in the world, we're in the top 50. Of course, within the top 50, there's a top 10 to 15 that contributes more than 50 to 60%, right? The big ones, China, US, etc. But the next 30, 35 countries are within, very near each other. And the 150 countries contribute so little. Those are the ones that might have, but even those 150 countries are contributing to reduce emissions because they're the victims. We are the victims of climate change. We cannot afford to feed the forces that will kill us, right? It's suicide. It's suicide for us to continue on coal power plants, on natural gas, long term, without an end to the stop gas. It is going to be, that's suicide. We're killing ourselves.
So, what is it going to take for the government to present a comprehensive decarbonization plan then?
They'll have to, after listening to all the sectors, they'll have to make that hard decision and say, this is where we will go. And that means accelerating the energy transition so that it's done in 7 years, 2030. Maybe give a year or two. I'm not also like 2030, we didn't reach what we reached 90%. That's okay. We can do the 10%. Usually the last 10% is the most difficult here. And I don't mind if we overshoot that 2030 target by another 1 or 2 years, right? Because we lost 2 years, 3 years from the pandemic. But 2030, we can transition. I really believe that. That's 7 years. That's long enough. You cannot have an excuse for not transitioning, And you can ask your partners to pay significant parts of that, your developed country partners. But you have to have projects. You have to have packages that they can invest in.
So, how then is our NDC going to look like? I mean, it's on its 3rd year. We've submitted our inaugural national determined contribution in April 2021. That was a pandemic, but we're hitting the 3rd year on April 15th. How are we looking so far, and where do we go from here? Because we will need to recast that after 3 years.
Yeah, we will have to see. I think the major decisions have to be made in the next 2 years on the plan. And then the decarbonization plan. And this is where we're going. This is what we will do. This is how we will triple renewable energy. By the way, renewable energy itself, we're not too bad. Okay, so we're not too bad on that, and kudos to the government for that. By the way, we got delayed. And here, this is not political for me. This is not. I would have to give credit to Duterte that reversed what I think was a failed policy of the Aquino government. Under GMA, Macapagal-Arroyo, we passed a Renewable Energy Act. That was sometime in 2008. If only we implemented that, we're way ahead now. But Aquino did not implement it, did not believe, and gave coal a lifeline for another 10 years, I would say. But Duterte started reversing that. Hopefully, Marcos now is also doing that. So we'll be done with coal. The battle of coal is won. It's just a matter of time. We're even retiring old plants or newer plants. Then, there are plants that really have to be retired, but there are also plants that did not have to be retired, but are now being retired. So that's good. And the economics of it are working there. But natural gas is a challenge because they have to make a decision of what stopgap is. It should be a no-brainer because we do not unless Malampaya, we find new sources, we don't produce natural gas, right? That will be imported. And it's stupid to import natural gas with the cost of shipping. Shipping itself is a very big driver of climate change. Like airlines, air travel is a very big driver of um, of climate change. So we would have to make really hard decisions. It's not easy. I don't. No, as I said, my friends, I don't want to necessarily be in their shoes because they're very difficult decisions to make. But with ambition, they can be made.
When you talk to the youth, I mean, if a Gen Z person came to you to ask what can they contribute after all these high-level conversations on global stock take, on loss and damage, what does it mean to them? And how can it mean something for their own families and loved ones? What do you tell them?
Well, I tell them that it's important to know what your environmental footprint is, what your family's environmental footprint is, what your school's environmental footprint is, and make sure that it's in the right place and going to the right direction. That's one. But I also tell them that whatever your family does is actually immaterial if the world does not change. And that's why you have to work for the world to change. That means, as simple as political action and voting for the right people come elections. It also means that if you are in a particular field, you work to find solutions in that particular field. It means that you demand from your superiors, your leaders, each other, more ambition. Kathy, we did not get the loss and damage fund because we were polite. We got it because we demanded it. We demonstrated. Young people went to the streets in Egypt. We got it in Egypt. And shouted, climate justice now, loss and damage fund now. There were a few countries that were a holdout because they do not feel that they have any obligation to help developing countries. I'll say the United States was one of those. The United States, under a democratic government, is more concerned about emissions. They're also they're willing to help, but not as a legal obligation, right? So they were resisting loss and damage. They were forced to accept loss and damage in that decision. In Dubai, the original decision was so weak. Didn't even, mention, I think it mentioned fossil fuels, and as if, for the first time we have fossil fuels, let's celebrate. No, that's not enough. So very weak. I forgot now the original, the first language, right? But everyone knew that they could not leave Dubai with that. So if they insist on weak language, they would, But as I said, as you might say politically, phase out is better than transition away. But for me, transition away ends with phase out. Phase out is the goal, is the end of a process. Phase down is the middle of the process. Transition is the start of the process that ends, that has phase down in the middle and ends, right? So now I can use that language to insist, why are you, and we're very successful in there, by the way, with the banks. Why are you still supporting coal? Many now are saying we will no longer support coal, including in the Philippines. The next is, why are you supporting natural gas if it contributes to the death of Filipinos in the next storm? I tell the youth, you have to do it that way. You have to tell, your parents, and we are parents, right, of youth. You have to tell your parents, you have to tell your leaders, why are you allowing the killing of Filipinos by allowing fossil fuels, by not transitioning away completely from fossil fuels. That's as what I like about the youth is they can be direct and frank. I'm a little bit older now, so I can actually be more direct and frank. As a diplomat, I don't talk
Especially to your three sons. You've got
Yeah.
three sons with Tita.
Oh, yeah,
I'm just wondering now that you mentioned parenthood. What are the discussions like? I mean, at home, you being a climate justice activist.
They're my wife Titay and my children are my best critics because they tell me my inconsistencies.
Such as?
I have inconsistencies like why are you eating that? Like I like to eat steak and you're supposed to limit your beef compared to veggies and things like that. And I listen to that. I mean, why are you using your aircon the whole day and things like that? I listen to that, and they're my best critics, and they love me, so it doesn't and they're proud of me also. I have to say that. I tell the youth, be angry. It's all right to be angry. Don't be violent. It's bad to be violent. But it's all right to be angry. It's all right to draw the line and to speak truth to power, even to your parents, even to your... And I know that works because parents tell me their children speak truth to power to them on these things. And what did I do? I didn't do anything. I just expose them to what they see, and this is the world that they will face. Most of my students, usually are in their late teens or 20s, and so I always make that calculation, right? Oh my God, you're all gonna be 40 years old in 2050 when the worst happens if business as usual continues, and you'll have young children then, right? And you're at the peak of your careers. But every day you're experiencing a storm, a drought, heat waves, and there's no escape for that. You can't move to the US and escape that. You can't go to Europe and escape that. You can't run away from climate change.
Just as a final point, as you mentioned the youth over and over again in this hour-long interview, what is your own personal manifesto for the next generation?
Courage. Do not be afraid of the future. Do not be afraid to get married if that's your vocation, to have families, to have children. Because many don't want children now. Because, as I said, if you're going to be a 40-year-old in 2050, right, and you have this world that you might have this world, likely have this world if you're not able to solve it, right? No matter how rich you are, you don't want... how can I raise children, in a world like this, right? So people... But I actually say no, because that world will actually happen if you don't have courage. But if you have courage, you will change the trajectory of the world, and there will be hope for all of us. So the second word that I have in my personal manifesto is always hope. For me, the basis of my hope is faith in God. And as a Christian, it's faith in Jesus Christ, my Savior. Just want to say that so that I don't also lie. That's the basis of it. So nothing can shake. Doesn't mean I'm not afraid. It doesn't mean I'm not sad or doesn't suffer. But I know whatever happens, I am grounded on something that will always give me courage and it will always give me hope. And, young people have that. Because when you have that, then you will change the world. And the 2050 I talk about will not be the world. I have a vision of that, Kathy. You either have a fortress world where all of us are always kept on running, locked up in our houses. We build higher fences thinking that the storm will never get in, and we keep the poor away because they get more desperate first before we get desperate, those of us that have more means. So I call it the fortress world. I don't want that world. We should not want that world. We want a garden world, a world where there's a garden like the paradise that was supposed to have given to us before original sin. We have this paradise that's gifted to us that we take care of. And that's a good, it's amazing thing, this world of ours, because with all of these things we just talked about, it is a beautiful world. With all of these challenges of this country, it is a really beautiful country, Dave. My experience, because I have walked so many mountains and been into so many seas, flown in so many islands of this country, seen it so challenged, but it is a beautiful country. The same with the world. I tell people I'd rather be a tourist guide because I love going around the world and seeing the beauty of the world, right? And we still have a choice to keep it beautiful, and the young people particularly has the choice to do that. But they have to have courage and hope.
So thank you so much, Tony, and I look forward to reading your memoir as soon as it's published. Appreciate the inspiring
Thank you,
conversation.
Kathy. Yes.
And catch us again next Tuesday at 9 p.m. Philippine Standard Time on One News. You can also check out Thought Leaders with Kathy Yang on Spotify and The Long Conversation on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. I'm Kathy Yang, and this is Thought Leaders.